Dear students, in the previous module we discussed about Python decision making statements such as if else, etc. In general, statements are executed sequentially. The first statement in a function is executed first, followed by the second, and so on. There may be a situation when you need to execute a block of code several number of times. In this module, you will learn how to make the computer execute a set of statements repeatedly. Let us consider the real world scenario. A hotel server performs a set of actions when serving a customer. First, greet the customer, give the customer the menu card, take the order, provide service, prepare the bill, submit the bill to the customer, get the money and pay, give the receipt to the customer and say thank you. A hotel server performs these steps for each customer, but he does not follow them when there are no customer to serve. He performs them only when it is his shift. If we were to write a computer program to simulate this behavior, it would not be enough just to provide the steps and ask the computer to repeat them over and over. We would also need to tell it when to stop executing them. There are two major types of programming loops: counting loops and event controlled or conditional loops. In a counting loop, the computer knows at the beginning of the loop execution how many times it needs to execute the loop. In Python, the counting loop is defined with the statement which executes the loop body for every item in the list. In a conditional loop, the computer stops the loop execution when a condition is no longer true. In Python, you can use the while statement for this. It executes the body of the loop as long as the condition is true. The while statement checks the condition before performing each iteration of the loop. Some languages also have a loop statement which performs the check at the end of the iteration, so that the loop is always executed at least once, such as the do while in C or C++ and Java. Python has no such construct, but we will see later how you can simulate such a loop. Counting loops are actually subset of conditional loop, that is, the loop is repeated until the required number of iterations is reached. Programming languages provide various control structures that allow for more complicated execution paths. Let us see the different types of control structures. The first type is called the while loop. Note that the condition is checked before the loop body is executed for the first time. If the condition is false at the start, the loop body will never be executed at all. The while loop consists of three important parts: the initialization, the condition and the update. In the initialization step, you set up the variable you are going to use in the condition. In the condition step, you perform a test on the variable to see whether you should terminate the loop or continue to execute the body the next time. Then after each successfully completed iteration of the loop body, you update the variable. By using while loop in Python, we can iterate over a block of code till test condition becomes false. Once test condition becomes false, the control will come out of the loop and continue to execute the statements after the while loop. We can normally use the while loop when we do not know how many times we can iterate the loop. In slide number 1, you can just see the flow chart that gives you the structure of the while loop. So, when the control enters the while loop, it encounters a condition. If the condition is true, then a conditional code is executed till the condition is true. So, here you have the looping structure, and finally, when the condition is false, the control transferred to the next statement after the while. The body of the while will start from indent and end with the unindent line of the code. If we do not indent after writing while loop, it will not be part of the while loop. So, indent is mandatory when you are writing the code using loops. The syntax for while loop in Python programming language is as follows. The syntax of while loop in Python programming language is given: while followed by expression and a colon, then indentation of statements, a single statement or a set of statements. Here statement or set of statements may be a single statement or a block of statements and to be written with indentation. The condition may be any expression and true is the any non-zero value. The loop iterates as long as the condition is true. When the condition becomes false, program control passes to the line immediately following the loop. Here is a simple Python example which displays the first 10 numbers from 0. So, here you can see that we use a variable num and assign it to 0, then we use the while construct keyword while, then the condition is number less than 10 followed by colon, and then we have an indentation and we have the first statement, that is print, which prints the number, which prints the text, the number is followed by the number and increments the number. Okay. So, looking at this condition, you can see that the print statement will be executed for 10 times, because every time it is executed the number variable num is incremented by 1 and the condition will fail once num reaches 10. The block here consisting of the print and increment statement is executed repeatedly until count is less than 10. With each iteration, the current value of the index variable, that is num, is displayed and then incremented by 1. When the code is executed, it produces the result as shown on the console. Next, we are going to discuss about how to use else statement in a while loop. We have used else in the if construct, do you remember? Many programming languages do so, but Python also lets you use else statement in a while loop. The else clause is only executed when the while condition becomes false. If we break out of the loop or if an exception is raised, it will not be executed. The syntax is while keyword followed by an expression and a colon, then a set of intended statements, then else keyword followed by colon and a set of intended statements. Let us see the example that illustrates the combination of an else statement with a while statement to print a number as long as it is less than 10, otherwise the else statement gets executed. So, here you can see that we have a variable x which is assigned a value of 5, then followed by we have a while construct which checks for the value of x whether it is less than or equal to 10. If it is less than or equal to 10, the value of x is printed and following that the x is incremented, and this while has followed by an else statement which prints the value of x is greater than 10. That is, this statement print x value is greater than 10 is executed only when the condition of the while, that is x less than or equal to 10, is false. And the output what you see in the next slide is we get numbers outputted from 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and 10, and once the value of x gets incremented and the value is greater than 10, the condition fails and the else part of the while loop is executed and then the control returns to the next statement after the else. So, we have a variable x which is assigned a value of 11, we have made a small change, instead of 5 we have used 11, and as long as x is less than or equal to 10, that is a condition. Now, you see that since the value of x is 11, the condition fails outright, it does not enter the while loop and the else statement is executed saying x is greater than 10, and the control returns to the next statement after the else. So, the output looks like what you have in x value greater than 10, that is the output. Instead of indentation inside the while loop, the statements can be written in a single line also. Now, let us see how to execute a single statement in a while loop. So, here you see that we start with assigning a variable x with a value 4, then we have the while loop, we say while keyword condition is x is greater than 0 colon, then we print the value of x and we start decrementing x as long as the value of x is greater than 0. Once the value of x reaches 0, the while loop is exited. Here you see that each statement is demarcated by a semicolon. You can see that there are two statements in the while body, but we use semicolons to separate them. Without the second statement, it would form an infinite loop, right. Next looping structure is the for construct. Python for loop can iterate over a sequence of items, that is either in a list, a tuple, a direct dictionary, a set or a string. The structure of for loop in Python is different than that in C, C++ or Java. That is, for integer I is equal to 0, I less than n semicolon I plus plus will not work here because that is the syntax of C or C++. In Python, we use the keyword in. It has the ability to iterate over the items of any sequence such as a list or a string. The syntax of a for loop in Python programming language is as for a variable, we call it a iterator variable in a sequence. The syntax of a for loop in Python programming language is for keyword followed by a variable, the iterator variable, in keyword and as name of the sequence colon followed by an indented set of statements to be repeated. If a sequence contains an expression list, it is evaluated first. Then the first item in the sequence is assigned to the iterating variable, iterator variable. Next the statements are executed. Each item in the list is assigned to the iterator variable and the statements block is executed until the entire sequence is exhausted. See the diagrammatic representation of for construct can be seen in the monitor. So, here you see that we have a condition which is an item fetched from the sequence, and if there are no more items in the sequence, we exit the loop. If there are items in the sequence, then we continue with the loop executing the set of statements in the loop. Now, we want to display 1 and 2. The code to display 1 and 2 will be for A is the iterative variable in range 3, where the function range is the range of values which starts from 0 and goes up to 2. That is, if we say range of n, then the range of values will be from 0 to n minus 1. Then we print A is the variable. To loop through a set of code a specified number of times, we can use the range function. The range function returns a sequence of numbers starting from 0 by default and increments by 1 and ends at a specified number. Note that range 6 is not the values from 0 to 6, but it is the values from 0 to 5. The range function defaults to increment the sequence by 1. However, it is possible to specify the increment value by adding a third parameter. We can also define the start, stop and the step size as range within open bracket start, comma, stop and step size and close bracket. This function does not store all the values in the memory, it would be inefficient. So, it remembers the start, stop and step size and generates the next number on the go. To force this function to output all the items, we can use the function list. For example, let us see the commands and their outputs using range. So, here you can see we are going to print, and within the print function we call a list and we populate the list using the range function from 0 to 10. So, the range function returns the value from 0 to 9 into the list. Now, the list contains the values 0 to 9 and the print statement prints the values from 0 to 9. Similarly, the range function from 2 to 8 returns a list from 2 to 7. Initial value is 2 and the last value is 8 minus 1 7. And in the first case and the second case the increment value is taken as 1, but whereas in the third case we also specify the increment value, that is 3, from initial value 2 to final value 20. So, the values are 2, 5, 8. So, the values are incremented by 3, 2, then 3 plus 3, that is 5, 5 plus 3 8, 8 plus 3 11, 14, 17 till the value is less than 20. Consider another example which we will print each book name in a book list. So, now here we have a variable list, that is a variable called books, which is nothing but a list, and the entries in the list are 3 items C, C++ and Java. Now, we use the for construct. The variable iterating variable is x, for x in books colon print x. Now, the for loop ends up printing all the elements that are available in the list books. Then another example, instead of having a list, the sequence could be a string, because string is a sequence of characters. Now, here for x in welcome, now x refers to every character in the string welcome. We set out printing each character in the string welcome. The for loop does not require an indexing variable to be set beforehand. Even strings are iteratable objects. They contain a sequence of characters. For example, look at the example in which loop through the letters in the word welcome. Shall we write a script that finds the sum of all numbers stored in a list using for loop? The script is seen on the console. Here we have a list called numbers with numbers from 6 and the elements are 6, 5, 3, 8, 4, 2, 5, 4, 11, and we initialize the variable sum to 0. Now, we simply say for val is a iterating variable in numbers, where the in is the keyword and numbers is a sequence. For every number in this list, what we do is we do an iteration, we add val to sum, which is initialized to 0. So, one by one the elements of the list numbers are added to sum and finally, the sum is printed. Okay. And when you add all these numbers, you get the sum as 48. Then suppose we want to break the loop before reaching the final test condition. We can use break to do so. With the break keyword, we can stop the loop before it has looped through all the items. We see the code with break statement. The same example, variable books with a list of 3 books C, C++ and Java. Now, for x in books, print the value of x, and what we try to do is, before we print Java, if x is equal to C++, then we break. The statement break exits the loop, and what we end up is, we end up showing the output as C and C++, because once the variable x is assigned C++, the list is the loop is exited. If the else statement is used with the for loop, the else statement is executed when the loop has exhausted iterating the list. When the loop is exhausted, the block under the else statement is executed. For example, consider the code. So, here you see that we have a for with a variable I in the range 10, that means 0 to 9. we print the value of I, we print the value of 0 to 9. In the else part we have a statement print goodbye. So, this print goodbye will be executed once we have exhausted the for loop, that is the range from 0 to 9. So, at the end of the value 9, that is 9, we get the value the goodbye printed. Like in the while loop, break does not execute if you break out of the loop or if an execution is like in the while loop, else does not execute if you break out of the loop or if an exception is raised. See an example for such a case. We have the same example for I in the range 10, that means 0 to 9, print the value of I. If we have I is equal to 7, we break. So, we are forcing to exit the loop the moment I is equal to 7. So, what we get, what is printed is values from 0 to 7, and since we are breaking out of the loop, the else part is not executed and the goodbye is not printed. Having seen about for and while, let us move into nested loops. A nested loop is a loop inside a loop. Python programming language allows us to use one loop inside another loop. The inner loop will be executed for a set of times based on the condition for each iteration of the outer loop. Let us see a few examples to illustrate this concept. Syntax for nested for loop and while loop can be seen on the screen. So, here now you can see that the first block of statements is the for loop, nested for loop, and the second block of statements is a nested while loop. So, we have the outer for, the iterator variable of the outer for is a sequence, then we have again another iterator variable, actually it should be a different iterator variable in the for the nested loop inside the first for loop. Then we have set of statements that are executed, okay. And similarly for the while statements. Let us see an example of nested loop that prints some characteristics of every fruit. Here you see we use two lists. One list is called characteristics, that is char, represents characteristics of a fruit, like for example, the color, the size and the taste, and we have another list called fruits, which has members like apple, banana and cherry. Now, we write a nested for loop in which the outer for with the iterator variable a iterates through all the items in the list char. The inside for is nested inside the outer one. The iterator variable b iterates through all the items in the list fruits. Then we print a comma b, that is for every characteristics, for example, for every characteristics, every item in the characteristics we print all the names of the fruits. So, the output will be, say first we take the red characteristics, then we print apple, red banana, red cherry. Then we go to the next characteristics, take big, then we go through all the three fruits, big apple, big banana, big cherry. Then we go to the next characteristic, that is tasty. We take tasty, then print all the three fruits, tasty apple, tasty banana, tasty cherry. So, that is what you see in the output. Let us now discuss about how to choose between for and while. Remember to use a for loop if you know before you start looping the maximum number of times that you will need to execute the body of the loop. For example, if you are traversing a list of elements, you know that the maximum number of loop iterations possibly needed is the number of elements in the list, or if you need to print 10 table, we know right away how many times the loop need to be run. So, any problem like iterate this for 1000 times or search this list of words, find all prime numbers up to 500 suggests that a for loop is the best. By contrast, if you are required to repeat some computation until some condition is met, you cannot calculate in advance when this will happen. you need to use a while loop. We will call the first case definite iteration, in which we have some definite bound for what is needed. The later case is called indefinite iteration, in which we are not sure how many iterations we will need and we cannot even establish an upper bound. We generally use for construct for definite iteration, in which we have some definite bounds for what it is needed, while construct is used in indefinite iteration, in which we are not sure how many iterations we will need and we cannot even establish an upper bound. As I said earlier, Python has no repeat until or do while constructs. These constructs check the condition at the end of the iteration. So, the body of the loop is executed at least once. We can simulate such a construct in Python using break in while construct. Here we see a Python code to sum a set of numbers which we get from the user. We create a variable called sum and initialize to 0, then we get the input from the user through the input function and convert to integer and put it in the variable no, and we enter a loop while true and we print inside the loop and add the number to the sum. Then we get the second number from the input from the user and check if the number is less than 0, that is if the number is negative. If the number is negative, we break, else we go through the loop until the user enters a negative number, and once the user enters a negative number, we come out of the loop and print the sum. The characteristics of this loop is that we enter the loop at least once. The loop is guaranteed to be executed at least once, since we get the first number and the condition of while is true, we enter the loop and we add the number to the sum, and then we check for the condition, and if the next number happens to be less than 0, then we break. So, this loop is analogous to a loop in other languages, which is implemented using repeat until or do while. So, this is how it is done in Python. Got it? Okay. We have reached the end of this module. Dear learners, so far we have discussed about the different types of loops statements in Python. I hope you understood the control structures which we have discussed. See you again in the next module. Thank you.